Hi folks, welcome to Monday's edition of the I Write Radio podcast. Just Stuart Lockhead.
Hello there.
And myself, Norrie Stewart. Today, Jimmy's out earning a crust. We're really just going to go with a presser today and the ramifications of BBC including opposition representatives in part of the program. Now, I normally watch this on the Scottish channel, which gives me the full, hour and 15 minutes it was today. But the BBC One channel tends to stop at 1 o'clock for the news. It now appears that they're going to stop at 10 to 1, giving opposition politicians the opportunity to come on and, on today's basis, contribute nothing to the knowledge base. Stuart and I have just sat through this, literally, and watched it with Douglas Ross, or as he's known to us, DRoss. What did you think? Can you see a positive in this?
Well, look, before we go into the message that the First Minister, very serious message the First Minister wants to talk about, let's just have a quick word about the BBC coverage. It was messy, clunky. Both you and I were sat watching Channel 9 on Freeview, or I was 115 on Sky, wherever you watch it, to get the BBC Scotland, the full version, waiting for the reaction afterwards. But then instead of that, we just both discovered to our surprise that it was only the BBC One show, which was already a short show, not showing the whole information, from half an hour out of an hour and a quarter show, normally cuts away at 1 o'clock to the BBC One news from London. But they cut away at 10 to 1, missed half the serious part of the briefing.
More than half.
More than half of the serious part of the briefing from the First Minister, well before any questions came from the press. And we got awkward questions asked of, even, let's be honest, I actually felt sorry for Douglas Ross. What was he supposed to comment about? You obviously couldn't watch the show, the briefing, because he had to be getting all mic'd up and all stood there in the garden with a camera in front of him.
I think if it does anything, it proves that this is political. I mean, Douglas Ross was asked questions that the First Minister is the only one that could answer.
Yep.
Effectively, what's going to happen? What about furlough, etc., etc. And I mean, all he was doing was continually repeating both governments of Scotland, attempting to defend the fact that the Cobra meeting's not happening till Tuesday morning, telling us what we already knew, that there'd been a meeting with Gove over the weekend.
Yeah, it was a phone call with Gove over the weekend.
Between the three devolved First Ministers.
And these were individual meetings. It wasn't even one of these virtual meetings.
So I mean, his ability to add to the information is zero. He doesn't even sit in Holyrood.
So I'm actually not going to criticize Douglas Ross particularly. I mean, just apart from the fact he said was the two governments here in Scotland. Yeah, okay. And he seemed to suggest that we could have been moving back to normality, but for this upswing. Well, I'm sick and tired of hearing this story. I mean, I think I said to you just before we started recording, I believe that one of the reasons why so many people are upset and angry about wearing masks and all the rest of it is because of the bad messaging they've had from an awful lot of authoritative people who've given the idea that this would all be over by now. People are angry because they thought it would be all over, and that's down to the messaging coming from London, certainly not coming from Scotland.
No, she has consistently said there's a long haul. But I mean, I'd be interested to see, what I think I found most interesting about it was Douglas Ross didn't criticize the First Minister.
He couldn't, because he didn't see the briefing.
All he did was emphasize the one nation approach, which Sturgeon seems happy to go with. I mean, certainly the message I got from Sturgeon today was that if the Westminster government goes far enough and puts in place protections for people to self-isolate, she'll go with that scenario.
It has to be fast enough too, doesn't it? She's not going to wait, she said.
Well, exactly. I mean, well, she did say 48 hours, which is allowing time. She seems to have allowed time for this Cobra meeting that's finally materialized. That both her and Mark Drayford from Wales have been asking for.
I think she's been, Boris must be feeling bullied into it.
I just get the impression sometimes that they do that. Oh, send go then to calm them down, but they're not getting what they ask for because we're the big government. You know.
Well, but I think
the impression I'm left with.
We need to let the viewers and listeners know what actually happened today, apart from this stupid switch of they renamed the BBC program and they've restructured it. And my last word on this new format from the BBC is this: there is now no reason for the First Minister not to use this briefing as a political platform.
I think that's why there was no criticism of her from DRoss, because that's the last thing they want. They do not want her to start pointing out shortcomings at Westminster.
Well, that's what she'll do.
They don't want a fight.
Yeah, well, it's their own fault. I'm sure that's what she'd do.
The other interesting thing about it is there is no mechanism by which, that we can see so far, by which the Scottish government can answer criticisms made in that 10-minute slot. So if DRoss or whoever decides to go for the jugular, there's going to be a full news cycle before the SNP government in Scotland get the opportunity to answer.
Not unless they're very clever. And well, at the end of their briefing, she gets something in an earpiece to tell her what to say. Because
if they're going live each day at 10 to 1,
she's got a chance at the end of her briefing to respond.
And that's the only way she could do it. And she's promised all along not to make it political. Yeah. So it'd be very hard for her to make it political.
Yeah, but the BBC have made it political.
I know, but she's the one that will get the criticism, not the BBC.
Yeah, well.
I mean, can you imagine her standing there going, oh, I've just been informed that DRoss has told the country that the Westminster government have given us £20 billion. In fact, they haven't given us £20 billion. I'd like to clear that up now.
I can hear her. I can see her doing that. Because after all, she could go to one of her scientific advisors to make a statement at the end and then listen. Well, the scientific advisor makes a statement, get an update, and then respond. It could all be done.
Do you think the BBC would wear it?
Well, they'd switch off as soon as she started saying that.
Well, I mean, that would give them the excuse to get rid of the programme.
I don't know. We'd better tell the world what she talked about, because it was a very important briefing today. Absolutely, but vital to all our health and welfare, was it not? We are moving into, and we're not going to get another lockdown like last spring. But although she wouldn't be drawn too much on speculating what the new rules would be, by the time you listen to all the journalists ask their various questions, and she is quite happy to speculate a bit because she wants us to be aboard. She wants to
forewarned.
She wants to bring us along and explain why the decisions are going to be what they are going to be. But we know it's not going to be the schools that are shut. But we do know it could be. I mean, I've heard the suggestion that it could be that we won't be allowed to visit each other's houses.
I can't see where she goes apart from that, apart from no mixing between households.
Pubs without food might be attacked. They might be told to shut at 10 o'clock. I say attacked, you know, new rules have told to shut at 10 o'clock. That's what seems to be a possibility.
Well, they seem really determined about the the spread between households, and the only way you can go there is isolate households. It does seem really strange to do that and allow hospitality to carry on the way it is.
Which is why, yes, that's part of the messaging. I think one of the, it'd be Jason Leach, no doubt, explained that, is, you know, we give them the information, the scientific information, and the politicians decide. They make the decisions, and they're then taking into account behaviour.
I would expect the discussion with Boris Johnson today will be Boris telling her what England's going to do.
But probably.
And tomorrow's Cobra will be the Westminster government attempting to get everybody else on board with what they're going to do.
What kind of threats, I mean, given that they do hold all the power, what kind of threats is Boris going to say to Nicola before, on this private phone call today, which other people presumably, but apart from officials, will know anything about, so that that Nicola Sturgeon will go along with what he wants?
Well, the only thing he can really do is say, right, there's no money coming to Scotland unless you follow this path.
Well, but then she can say that in public, can't she?
Well, she can do, but, you know, it depends. I mean, England seems to be in a slightly worse position than Scotland at the moment, and maybe they're going to go a bit further. I can't see them going for, I mean, she reiterated Scotland's message that if you can work from home, work from home.
Yeah, that's
that is not the message in England.
Mm-hmm. That's different. And what about the other, the circuit breaker, also known as renamed a fire break by the First Minister last week? I'm not sure that the Scottish Government want to go along with that, because to start with, the English October break is it's a different beast from what we used to call the tatty holidays here in Scotland.
I think that Sturgeon wants something done this week. I don't think she wants to wait till October.
That's a good point. I should have said that. Yes, no, you're right. I don't think she wants to wait till October. I
think she wants it. Well, she did say 48 hours.
Aye, 48 hours.
And I don't see the sense of waiting till October.
Oh no, I don't either. But look at the figures. Oof.
We don't know where we'll be in October.
6.3% of those tested. By the way, those tested figures have come down hugely. I looked them up this morning.
Scotland or the UK?
Scotland. The Scottish figures. We at one point, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were testing just under 25,000 a day. On Saturday, they tested 4,000 in Scotland. So that figure of 6.3% is probably not very reliable. You know, we've been told that if it's over 5% with the World Health Organization, it's time to act. But that's, I think the First Minister did say, well, we prefer a 7-day average for that figure.
Yeah. Let me have a quick look at my board. What have we got here? Test. People tested yesterday, 4,000. 4,500.
Yeah, 4,500.
By the week, contact tracing, this is 6,000 with 1,000 positive. So, yeah. I mean, is that simply because it's a weekend?
Well, it always varies. The figures are always a bit variable, but certainly I'm sitting here, new infections and deaths by day, and this is the spread from the 20th of August to that's a month ago. And a month ago, the new infections, you've got to put your mouse over to get this. It's a 7-day average that matters, isn't it? 7-day average 73, and the latest one is now 241. So that is nearly 4 times higher in a month.
Getting serious, and it's over 5 In fact, it's 6, isn't it?
6.3%, but that was just a daily figure. So as I say, we need to, let me see what the 7 days figure is. Oh no, I haven't got that. That would be the percentage of tested. Have you got that one?
I don't think so. No, I can't see it. I find, well, I do. I think she certainly seems to be sending out the message that this is possibly a tipping point, and it needs to be nailed down. It'll be interesting to see, very interesting, in fact, to see what the Westminster government comes up with, because their message has definitely been get back to work. And I can't see any way they can avoid changing that message. They can certainly change their 6 people from 6 households meeting. I think they're going to have to do that. But how well is it working for us? Is it working well for us? Doesn't really look that promising, does it?
They may allow only one person from another household to come in. That would allow granny or grandpa to come and babysit or something, you know.
Which, if you want to keep schools open, is something that has to be considered. Your babysitting duties.
Anyway, it's hospitality, house to house, well, inside houses and work. These are the 2 areas where transmission is taking place. So these will be the 3 areas, and these will be the 3 areas that will be clamped down on one way or another.
Will the Westminster government even consider curbing hospitality?
And work is a different thing for them as well. Don't forget, they wanted all these people back in work. I mean, they don't forget, they offered people £10 each off of food to go out a week before they. I
have to say that worked very well, according to my daughter who runs the restaurant.
Well, okay, but 2 weeks later they were threatening fines of £1,000.
Yeah, to pay for it.
1 or 2 things that, what was it? There were 1 or 2 funny things that from the presser. What was it? This guy, P&J, Tom Peterkin, was talking about the situation at St Andrews. And the First Minister was talking about, she was trying to empathise about students, because there was a question about where illegal Freshers' Week parties was the question. So the First Minister was trying to empathise, and she said, oh, well, I may, you know, it's a long time since I was a student, but I can remember the messier bits.
Yes.
And you're left asking, you know, I was surprised that there wasn't one brave journalist to say, do you think you could expand on what you mean by messier bits, First Minister?
I think we all know what she means. That's the St Andrews University outbreak.
Is there an outbreak there?
Yep, there's double figures have tested positive, and there's 40 of them self-isolating after a freshers' party.
I gave a personal report of what I saw in Portobello Beach last week, and I'm not surprised. I don't blame them. I feel like the First Minister. I can vaguely remember the messier bits. I don't even have to think all the way back to when I was a student.
Okay, let's move on for the presser. What else caught your eye today, Stuart?
Ooh, well, there was still there was that one last piece on. Well, we've got Ian Lawson still going on about the Salmond inquiry rather than the Salmond scandal. Let's try not be so fiery about it. Stuart Campbell analysed the Dani Garavelli article that we talked about yesterday, and came out with quite 2 or 3 points where she was lying. She was making claims that Alex Salmond had stopped documents being produced to the inquiry, and Stuart Campbell produced evidence that he hadn't.
Well, effectively what he'd done was warn the Scottish government that they could be breaking the law if they produced the documents.
This is what Salmond did to the Scottish government.
Well, Salmond's lawyer.
Lawyer, in fact, yes, you're right. So it wasn't.
Which is interesting.
we're still left with what we talked about yesterday. I mean, there's not much more to add to that, really, is there? I mean, there's been no...
Well, he's got a piece today, Stu Campbell, on wings. He's sending a freedom of information request about who attended a meeting. So we're right down into the minutiae now.
All right.
For Stuart Campbell. Apparently, someone who attended a meeting, it was denied that the meeting ever took place. It's one of these weird things. I mean, the meeting might well have taken place, but under another heading kind of thing. But Stuart Campbell has said that there's nothing in the diary about the meeting, and there should have been, because it took place in the First Minister's office.
And if which office? So you see, if it's
her office in Holyrood.
That's official government office, so that means
so
there should be a record.
There should be a record of the meeting. So I don't know what happens if you pop in for a quick coffee and to talk about having been at the local flower show. I don't know if that gets minuted, but it seems that anybody that walks through the door, there should be a record of.
I'm not sure. I tell you what I did see. Ian Lawson was talking about the Salmond affair, and he was answering a question from a lot of his followers, which was why did this conspiracy, they wanted to know a reason. Why would they do this? And he explained it, that it was Salmond wasn't wanted back. Do I need to explain why? But what the trigger was Mark MacDonald. We mentioned this yesterday, not this, what I'm about to say, but Mark MacDonald, Grousebeater, there were 2 or 3 very quick disciplinary actions taken against SNP members back in 2017. And what Ian Lawson is suggesting, that Mark MacDonald's seat could have been at risk in Aberdeen. It was in fact, it still is in fact, the highest majority SNP seat in Scotland. And they were worried that that there might be a by-election caused if Mark MacDonald was disciplined too hard, banned from the party. Apparently they didn't ban him from the party, they just withdrew the whip, which meant there was no by-election. But if there'd been a by-election, Alex Salmond could have walked in and been back in Holyrood within a couple of months. And they didn't want that, and that's the reason they moved against him.
Well, the only reason is to ensure that there's not a viable alternative to Sturgeon. I mean, that's the only reason they can be wanting Alex kept out. And maybe it shows them thinking ahead. Maybe they saw the criticism she was going to be under for not calling an independence referendum.
Because if you bear in mind, that was 3 years after the Indy Ref won, because that was September 2014. This happened November 2017.
I can't, the timeline is lost to me, I'm afraid. But I mean, the SNP cannot be criticised for the speed with which they deal with these kind of problems. They can possibly be criticised for a lack of justice in the way they deal with them, but they're certainly swift to move people out of the party or take the whip from them or whatever. I think I wonder if their worry was that Salmond simply wouldn't accept that kind of discipline or would be prepared to criticize that kind of discipline.
Well, what they call another focus of power would have been,
yeah,
would become,
and they're not wrong, and they're not wrong.
He still is a focus of power.
Yeah,
power.
But if he's sidelined, you can't split the party over it. The party has to go with whoever's at the top. But that has to be the reason. The reason has to be to stop that split between the Salmondites who want really,
Fundies, they're called, fundamentalists.
well, they want the referendum come what may.
And the gradualists, which is led these days by Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, that's the obvious reason as far as I'm concerned.
That's and that's been generous. We could have
well, and again, I mean, I'll reiterate what I said yesterday. People have already been sidetracked, rather, into thinking of this inquiry at Holyrood as an Alex Salmond inquiry, not an inquiry into the system that the civil service use. So
it's specifically not a retrial of Alex Salmond. It is into what happened at the top of the civil service, the Scottish government and the SNP.
But nobody talks of it in those terms.
We'll find out tomorrow. Presumably they're back again in session tomorrow. It's a Tuesday,
I would think so. I mean, Dani Garavelli basically showed up the problem. She had to talk about it in terms of being an inquiry into the system, but then proceeded to make, well, perhaps not make the accusations, but reheat the accusations against Alex Salmond. And that's the opportunity that the opposition parties will take and have taken. I mean, Murdo Fraser and Alex Cole-Hamilton have both asked straight out questions about Alex Salmond.
They're still going down the road. There was a water cooler rumor about Alex Salmond's sexual activities. Whereas what we discovered last week from the civil servants, last week and the week before, is that there was bullying accusations, but there was absolutely no evidence at all of anything sexual.
Well, I mean, Dani Garavelli, because one person's opinion was that Alex Salmond was bullying and people were talking about him being bullying, Alex Salmond is therefore a bully. That, no right of reply, no questioning. I mean, she's got the answer to all these questions from the people that she supports, the alphabet women. Now, why isn't she quoting them right, left, and center in this latest article? Maybe they've stopped speaking to her. Maybe they're not happy that she isn't full on attacking Salmond. I don't know.
Let's do a bit. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here. I'm going to list what the Garavelli 10. Okay, it's not too contentious, but I'm just going to mention their names. These are the 10 journalists that apparently support Dani Garavelli. They know where all the bodies are buried in this nonsense. Kieran Andrews, he's the Times. Steve Bird, I don't know who he is. Severin Carell, he's the Guardian man. Muir Dickey, don't know. Kenny Farquharson, Dani Garavelli herself, Paul Hutchin, now at the Daily Record, Magnus Linklater, who used to run the Scotsman, I think he probably still is, Izzy Lyons and Dave Mackay, and they're now known as the Garavelli 10. So there you go.
Well, none of them better criticise Craig Murray or Hurst, because Dani Garavelli's article has put them in the dock, as far as I'm concerned. If you work for a unionist newspaper, you can apparently say what you like without fear of being dragged into court. If you're a blogger or a left-wing journalist, you're going to court, son.
But as long as you're a pal of Dani Garavelli, whose partner is a high agent at the Crown Office. That's how you're protected in this country.
It would be, I would like to see Dani Garavelli on one of these Sky newspaper show, and I'd like that question to be asked over on air. Do you think the fact you're not in the dock has got anything to do with your husband's present position? be interesting.
That's a good, well put there. Very well put.
Anything else that particularly jumped?
Yes, I missed Elliot Bulmer's very interesting article yesterday because it's in the Scotland, the Sunday National that you flashed
All
up.
right. Yep.
Scotland cannot wait for England to start putting its ossified house in order. Well, yeah, and he highlights the key issue, the constitution or the lack of a constitution. It doesn't matter what, you can talk about the internal market bill, you can talk about the Sewell Convention, you can talk about all kinds of federalism, you can talk about any number of devolved power plans from the UK government, and they're all meaningless because of the way that the so-called constitution of the United Kingdom works. There isn't one. No parliament. In other words, Boris can do what he likes now, but once he's gone and that parliament is, and they have another election and another parliament comes in, they can rescind everything again. Because there is no UK constitution, and that is actually a big weakness. At the moment, it's a danger.
And the other huge problem is if Boris does decide on a bonfire of all our individual rights, what government would give that power away again? Why would they do that? Yeah,
I mean, Dr. Elliot Bulmer, who is a constitutional expert, he says, yeah, it's a concerted effort to undermine all institutions that could strain or contradict the power of Boris's Brexit Britain regime.
Well, I think it was Elliot that made the point that basically they can do what they want. They don't, I mean, they would be unanswerable to anybody. And during this particular emergency with the pandemic, they've got even more rights, quite apart from giving their pals PPE contracts. They can
have emergency powers.
They can ride roughshod over a dozen important areas.
So, I mean, there must be, it could be interesting when I have to watch the House of Commons this afternoon, presumably, because they'll be making progress on the internal market bill. It's got possible amendments on that coming up. And then I would imagine...
I mean, be scared of nothing. They'll get nodded through. That's already agreed.
But there are Tory backbenchers that are not happy about the kind of pandemic emergency measures, like the rule of 6. The actual rules, the laws around it were only announced half an hour before midnight when they came into effect. And, you know,
but that's a bad thing.
Well, even Tory backbenchers don't like that.
Yeah, but it's a bad thing because what the Tory backbenchers want to do and will be able to do with the majority is to open up the country even more. I mean, I'm absolutely certain if there was a vote tomorrow on doing away with all the rules around the pandemic, that the Tories would get very near a majority for it because it's now about the economy and money for them. That's the problem. And it wouldn't surprise me if whatever they introduce, because I think they're going to have to do something about furlough, whatever they introduce is going to have to be very slippy to get it past this particular cohort of Tories. I think they'd be happy to see people starving to death because they don't really believe people will suffer. They can't empathize because they've never been there. You know, they're going to believe your brother who's got a bit more money than you will give you a cabbage to eat or whatever.
Or some rotten potatoes.
Aye, well, yeah. Interesting. I think I sent you the link to the Alan Massey piece in the Times.
Oh, I haven't seen that. You'll have to tell me about that.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with Massey about quite a few things, but I do agree with him that Boris is going to be a huge problem for the Tories. His competence or his lack of it is being shown up at every turn at the moment. And Alex Massey makes that point in spades. And he doesn't muck about. He does not muck about.
You look as though you might have a clip.
I don't have a clip. Sympathetic Tories, or perhaps just more the sycophantic kind, intimate that Johnson has somehow been led astray or persuaded to part company with his true instincts. Let Boris be Boris, they cry, forgetting that real politics is not an episode of the West Wing. What you see in politics is what you actually have. And in this instance, that is a prime minister incapable of rising to the occasion. The problem is Boris being Boris.
Well, look, there was a rumour printed in the National this morning that Boris was actually took a secret holiday in Tuscany at the castle of the Russian oligarch that owns the Independent newspaper.
No, I don't think that's new. He was there for a weekend a few months ago.
Well, it's only about 3 weeks ago or something.
Oh, right. Well, he was caught in...
Oh, yeah, he was there last year as well, yeah.
He was caught in the airport looking very disheveled.
No, that was last year. No, this is apparently, but apparently the government is in full denial about this recent one, so-called visit. But he seems to be so close to this Russian oligarch who is not under any pressure from Putin. So, I mean, just how much control has Putin got of Boris, not let alone Trump in America?
Sorry about that. I don't think he'll last. I don't think he'll last. I think they'll let him take the hit for Brexit and the pandemic and then move him on. I hope they do anyway.
I mean, coming back to what Dr. Elliot Bulmer says about constitutions and thing, he says here, Elliot's not alone in this. We talked about this, other people, Neil Asherson, just what it means in England anyway, the devolution issues and all the rest of it. England is stuck in a rut. It is not their fault, which is an interesting way to put it, but it is ultimately their problem. My tentative suggestion is that an act of the Scottish Parliament make provision for the formation of a Scottish Constituent Assembly made up of MSPs, MPs and civil society to draft a new Scottish constitution that can then be put to the people in an advisory referendum. Now, there's actually what seems to me an interesting idea that could be taken up straight away.
How long do you think a constitutional committee will sit talking about a new constitution for Scotland?
It would be action.
How long do you think they would sit?
But it would be something. There's nothing happening at all.
As far as I know, there is at least 2 Scottish constitutions already written.
Yes, the ones written by Elliot Bulmer, at least one.
And yeah, one of them was Elliot's.
Yeah, I would go with the Elliot's one, the other fellow.
And there's a previous one to that. And Elliot's one got a lot of criticism for being basically a constitution like any other. So there was nothing in it about welfare powers and things like that.
You don't put those in your constitution.
I know, but that's why it was criticised.
These idiots haven't a clue about...
Because it wasn't a constitution written by the Greens and Commonweal.
These people have no idea what a constitution is. They think it's like the American Constitution where you're allowed to have guns.
Well, I mean, I do think we should write that into our constitution.
But we should be allowed to have guns. In fact, we should be like the Swiss, some Swiss cantons. We're a very federal country. You're obliged to, if you're a male of a certain age, you're obliged to have a gun.
Yeah, that's because they don't have a decent army. So if they get invaded, everybody's got to have a gun to hand. Yeah. That's their excuse for it anyway. I think maybe we've exhausted today's list.
What did Ruth Wishart have to say? I'm not very much today. She, what did she say? Backing no will deny young Scots the kind of lives we have enjoyed. So what is she saying? Well, you got to listen to what Ruth's got to say. She's kind of the writer you used to always read it in the Sunday Post, isn't she? You know,
Never read the Sunday Post, to be honest.
What was it called? The Honest Truth, I think it was.
All right.
And I know all about the Daily Express as well. Here's a lesson for all of you out there. My mother was great friends with, well, it doesn't matter who she was, her best friend took the Daily Express every day, all her life. She took it and read every word. And my mother was a staunch supporter of the SNP and definitely of the left-wing variety, but it didn't stop her having her best friend with a very different political point of view.
So she helped her best friend on with her jackboots, did she?
Yes, I don't know how they got. I would love to have been a hole in the wall. Sorry, a fly in the wall when they were on their own. Goodness knows what they talked about.
It would have been interesting.
It's what Ruth Wishart is talking about. Obviously, us big oldies, we are getting the blame for a lot of things that have gone wrong. But also, we're supposed to sit back and just let time go by. 55,000 old folks will die in Scotland every year, most of them who would have voted no, and 55,000 new young people will qualify to vote who will probably vote yes. However, look at the state of the world that young people have got. I mean, when we were young, you could walk. You know, for the last 40 years as members of the EU, there was the Erasmus, a scheme you could go to university anywhere in Europe. When I was young, you could get a grant to go to pay for your living accommodation, and all your tuition was paid for as a student. You could walk out when I was a young man, you could walk out of a job in the morning and walk into a job in the afternoon without even knowing there was a job to go to.
That was the big difference for me is that you could spend a day knocking on doors, and if you didn't get a job, you were doing something very, very, very wrong. Might have been sweeping floors. I mean, I got work like that in a cash and carry, in a mill, in a slaughterhouse.
No, I mean, I drove. You know, I was homeless in London, so I had a Mini which I lived, and then so I'd moved out of London and lived in my Mini, and then went to Bournemouth and just walked into the hotel and got a job washing dishes. And 2 weeks later, I was working on a building site, earning good money.
Yeah, and kids just can't do that now.
No, they can't do it.
So, when Scotland becomes independent, will we make that part of the constitution?
I don't think we can go back, but we certainly need a constitution that there's no point. So much of the suggestions to the solutions to the current impasse on how we get to independence in Scotland are just tinkering at the edges. You got to face the one big thing is that the sovereignty of the Westminster Parliament is built in like the bricks from 1688.
Well, let's win the next election at Holyrood on a promise of an independence referendum and see what happens then.
Yes.
I think we'll call it a day at that, Stuart. Maybe we'll have Jimmy to throw in a few jokes tomorrow.
Yeah, so we've got lots of meat to talk about between now and tomorrow, that's for sure.
Yeah, there was a lot over the weekend in the papers, but it needs some rumination.
And we've got the First Minister's phone call with Boris Johnson this afternoon, a Cobra meeting tomorrow morning, the Salmond inquiry tomorrow.
Busy time in politics. And we have no idea what's going to happen because the Westminster government is populated with madmen and women. I was forgetting Priti Patel there.
Oh God, imagine her becoming Prime Minister.
No, I can't. I actually don't even want to think about it. Okay, call it a day at that. Thanks for being with me, Stuart.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Norrie.
I'm Norrie Stewart. Thanks for listening, folks. And as I say, hopefully we'll have Jimmy with us tomorrow. We'll catch you all later. Cheers for now.